So, this is the fourth video in this series for the artistic development of children and adolescents. The first video was an introduction to the overarching themes in this series, and the first two videos looked at the artistic development of our youngest students from birth through preschool. Before we go on to looking at the artistic development of children in elementary school, approximately ages 5 to 9, before we go there, I want to take this video, this third video then, to spend some time just looking at some of the criticisms of theories of artistic development. I think it's really important to just know what other perspectives there are in any given topic, especially when it comes to education. And then connected to that, this video will also look a little bit at contemporary art studio practices. So how do contemporary artists, adult artists, create artwork, and how might that influence teaching children and stages of artistic development. So the goal for this video then, I have a series of questions that I'd like you to respond to that are on the discussion board. They can be entire dissertations if we wanted to, but we're just going for really brief just your initial visceral responses to these questions. They don't have to be overly academic or definitely not overly long. But think about, what is your definition of art, basically in a sentence or two, and how is children's art similar to and different from the work of adult artists? What qualifies being an artist? How do you know if you're an artist? And in your opinion, are there other benefits and limitations to studying the artistic development of children and adolescents, other than the ones that we'll talk about in this video? So those are the three overarching ideas or questions I'd like you to think about through this video. So one of the criticisms that researchers and writers in the field of art education have for stage theories of artistic development is we can't agree on what even the word art is, what the definition of art is. So I put a few pictures up here just to start on the left side. So art can be a sculpture in the lower left corner. You might recognize that Love sculpture that's in Philadelphia by Robert Indiana. So art can be sculptural, and in this case, it's just text. So it could be text, it could be figurative, it could be abstract. Then just above that, how to start your art journal, there's Pinterest and tons of ways that you can keep an art journal, almost like a sketchbook. Keep going up in the very top center, it is basically a pickled shark. It's a shark that's in formaldehyde, and that's a sculpture that was created by an artist named Damien Hirst in 1991, and it has a long title. It's called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. So this was actually taken at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So a pickled shark can be art. If we keep going, the top right-hand corner is Monet's Water Lilies, the ancient Greek Acropolis. Down in the right corner is iPhone designs. Are product designs also art? And then finally, just to end there, in the center, is art basically showing someone how to draw something very realistic? Is that art? If maybe we agree all of these things are art, what do they have in common? That's a question for a whole other course, I think. But to bring back to our purposes, if we can't agree on a definition of art, How can we identify stages of artistic development? So this is a question that some of the critics have. And even if we do agree on a definition of art, the things children learn in school seem to only happen there in school and don't really reflect the kinds of artwork they do outside of school, nor does school art reflect what adults artists do. So I picked three kind of stereotypical images that you might find on Pinterest. Again, they're very watered down, cliche kind of projects that you might see in school, K to 12, let's say. Very crafty with simple materials, or projects that have to follow a step-by-step sequence, or projects that are based on the elements and principles of art and design. So things like line, shape, texture are elements. Design principles are more relate to composition. So even if we do agree on a definition of art, this kind of art education curriculum, these ideas here, these pictures that you see, they don't really reflect what kids do outside of school necessarily, nor do they have a strong connection to what adult artists are doing. And I'll just also point out that any of these criticisms, right, you can disagree with. So you don't have to kind of buy into any of these criticisms either. I'm just putting it out there as what other researchers are saying about artistic development. So one of the books that we read in our courses is my book on creating art lesson plans. And in chapter 2, if that hasn't been assigned yet, it will. Chapter 2 in that book talks about contemporary art and post-studio practices. Post-studio simply means now artists are working outside of the studio. Well, for a long time they have been, but many artists are working outside of what you'd think of as a traditional studio. So contemporary artists, they're creating artwork with more of an interest in these ideas that I've bullet pointed here. Audience participation, altering the audience's environment, collaboration, social critique, and interrogation of identity, and process over product. So I'd like to look at a couple of contemporary artists who work in these veins. And we will come back to sort of how this relates to criticizing the stages of artistic development. Again, we're thinking about how if the stuff that we're teaching kids in school and the methods through which we're teaching them don't really reflect strongly sometimes what adult artists are doing, why do we have that disconnect? So the first artwork and artist I wanted to mention is Ai Weiwei. He created this installation. It's called Sunflower Seeds, and these pictures were taken at the Tate Modern in London. And those are actually porcelain, hand-painted, hand-created sunflower seeds. And it was a collaborative piece. The artist worked with 1,600 artists in an area in China where porcelain has traditionally been made. And these are each individual tiny sculptures that fill this room. So he's very interested in audience participation, altering the audience's environment, and then collaboration, since he's worked with all of these artists. And there's lots of metaphor that you can read about with this piece, but definitely commenting on the idea of mass production, of the historical contexts of porcelain from China. So it's more of a metaphorical piece, as well as just kind of stunning visually. But for our purposes, then, contemporary artists are really kind of looking at how can we engage artists in the collaborative art making process? How can we engage audience members in actually participating in the work itself? Also, another feature of contemporary artists is that they're making social critiques and interrogations of identity. And a good artist to look at who does this is Nick Cave. And he creates what he calls these sound suits. And this is one here on the left that you see, created out of found objects. I've also put on Canvas a link to a YouTube video where he discusses the origins of his sound suit. So I'd like you to take a look at that too. But his work really grew out of his own identity as an African American man living in the United States. And the very first sound suits emerged from his responses to the Rodney King assault in Los Angeles. And so there's a connection between social critique, interrogating beliefs and assumptions in society, all through his artwork. Plus, they're incredibly collaborative as well. So he works with many assistants to create these pieces, and he does live performances that involve entire communities as well. The last idea that I mentioned about contemporary art post-studio practices is that artists are more focused on process over product. So another artist I wanted to point out is Leonardo Drew. And you can see him in this photo working in his studio where he's creating these wooden sculptures. And it looks like it's kind of found wood, but he actually buys materials new. And he washes them, burns them, somehow transforms them to look old and weathered, and assembles them into these massive freestanding sculptures, as well as sculptures that hang on the wall as well. And he's really interested in materials and then how those materials interact in the spaces where they're located. And again, I'm going to put a link to a video about him also on the discussion board on Canvas. But this is another one of his, I would call it an assemblage, which is kind of like a sculpture that hangs on the wall. Sometimes they're also displayed on the floor, but an assemblage is a little bit different than a sculpture in that it brings in multiple types of materials. So you can see a quote here on the right that the artist says about this work. And you can see also at the top, the work is made out of wood, metal, paint, gouache, which is a type of opaque watercolor, thumbtacks, ballpoint pen, graphite paper, fabric, and newsprint. And he says, I would call number 162 a large drawing, but also it is a history of the places and things that I've done. I've been making art all my life, and I think that piece actually has a good deal of the things that I've touched on it. So it's almost like a record of his life experiences. But again, there's a great video. It's an excerpt of a longer film, but it's on the Art21 website, and I'll put that link on the discussion board on Canvas. I'll also put a link to this essay. It's what they call a conversation starter on the Art21 website. It's called What Qualifies Being an Artist? And there's short excerpts to read and then a few videos if you'd like to watch them to kind of get the artists' perspectives. There's lots of contemporary artists who respond to this question. So just so we can swing back then to criticisms of the stage theories of the artistic development of children and adolescents then, since, on the one hand, we have artists working in these really collaborative, process-focused, social activist approaches to making their artwork with really unique materials. Why is it that we don't see so much of that in K-12 art? There's like this disconnect then between K-12 art education curriculum design and what kids are actually doing in their lives, and then what adult artists are also doing in contemporary culture. So to kind of bring in some other criticisms then is that these theories are problematic because, and you'll see throughout these videos so far and the ones coming up, that we're often only talking about children and adolescents' drawings and paintings. We rarely see works in sculpture or works in graphic and interactive design, photography, or even here in these two examples. On the right is this cardboard sculpture that was made when I had a group of students do a family art night at William Penn Elementary School. And then on the left, that's a collage made by a high school student who I was teaching in an after-school program at Deerfield High School. So we don't often see examples of anything else other than paintings and drawings when we're studying artistic development. So that's another problem. Also, it might, if we're looking at this development, it might seem like we're suggesting that all children's art is the same, emerging in predictable stages, which I touched on that in the last video, but that is worth repeating. You can see in just these two examples, the image on the right was created by a 4-year-old, and the image on the bottom was created by a 6-year-old. And, at first glance, you might think the one on the top looks more advanced, right? It has more details in it with the background. So in some ways, they look pretty comparable. The little cars look pretty comparable. But they are, 2 years apart, which is a lifetime when you're that young. So, we don't want to suggest that kids neatly follow this planned trajectory, right? We can't really say that kids' artwork will evolve in a certain predictable stage. And I wanted to show you these little pictures too, because it emphasizes the fact that kids are individuals and they progress at their own pace, right, with the support of an effective art teacher. But they're gonna advance at their own pace. So these were all done by preschoolers, all about the same age. But you can just notice how differently their symbol making appears. The second to the bottom, Sienna's family, looks far more advanced, if we use that term, than Tybolt's family on the bottom there, right? He's still using those globals or the tadpole figures that we talked about in earlier videos. So even within just a class, you can have such a range of children's artistic abilities. So it's just something to keep in mind. So these theories are also problematic because they often do not account for the diversity of work produced within a particular stage. So kids are not just painting and drawing, right? They might be doing that in school, but then at home they might be playing with Play-Doh and building things outside with sticks and building Lego and creating their own comic books. So we kind of pick and choose what meets the criteria for the stages of artistic development, and we just kind of insert it. We don't really look at the whole diversity of work that kids are making. They also don't often consider the ways in which culture or politics, particularly popular visual culture and social interactions, influence children's graphic representations. So how does pop culture show up in kids' artwork? And this is an example here. This was actually a SOAR project that my students and I did a few years ago, where we taught a whole puppet workshop. And this child, she created this marionette based on the character Joy from the movie Inside Out. So you can see pop culture definitely influences their choices. And I mentioned this little guy in an earlier video too. This student created Olaf from Frozen. So again, pop culture is going to impact how and what kids create, and that's not often taken into account in most literature about stage theories of artistic development. Other ideas to consider too is that child art does not exist, some would say. Rather, the art educators, the art teachers, not the children, create quote unquote child art as a result of our instruction. So kids aren't producing what they want or how they would want. They're doing what we're telling them to do, and then we're saying this is fulfilling some kind of stage in artistic development. That's another idea. Again, you can agree with it or not. The theories of artistic development often reflect adults' interpretation of children's work, not the children's interpretations themselves. So you don't often hear a whole lot of the children's voice or the children's reflections on their work in these stage theories also. So given that, even though we have these criticisms then of stage theories, there are benefits. They make us more reflective educators. We pay attention to what students are making and how we're teaching if we have a sense of these stages of artistic development. And any of the limitations that I've just described, that can just point us to where we need more research done. So it's not like this is the end of what can possibly be known. This is just the beginning, and any limitations are really opportunities. It also allows us to consider the ways in which all domains of human development interact. So how does my students' physical development, emotional development, cognitive development, all of those things, how do those things impact the kind of artwork they're going to make? So that's another benefit, again, of bringing in artistic development as well. It can inform our instructional practices, what's called as pedagogy, and how we choose materials, processes, and lessons. So I think the more we know about what kids are interested in, what they're capable of, how much we can push them, how much we need to support them, all of those things can really inform how we teach. And then it can just help us become better teachers because it makes us think about really deeply meaningful questions. When we teach art, we're not teaching kids how to make a coil pot in clay. We're not just teaching them how to create a color wheel. Those might be beneficial skills, but we're doing bigger things through our teaching. So as we interrogate the stages of artistic development, we can ask questions like, what is art? What's the purpose of art? What are my conceptions of how people learn across the lifespan and across cultures? What are my conceptions or my assumptions of myself as a teacher? So even though we've had these sorts of limitations of artistic development, I think they're still beneficial. So take a few moments and look at the questions then again on Canvas, on the discussion board, and just write, a simple response to these questions. Define art. How is children's art similar to and different from the work of adult artists? What qualifies being an artist? In your opinion, are there other benefits and limitations to studying the artistic development of children and adolescents? I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that also, and then share that with the group. And after you get a chance to write your responses, then go ahead and reply to other students in the class as well on the discussion board. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.